Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into Maulana Maududi's commentary on Surah Al-Furqan. It is honestly a fascinating piece of architectural theology. Whether you're already familiar with his commentary or you're just looking for a structured breakdown, we're going to unpack the sheer logic and the historical weight of this incredibly profound text. Let's get right into it.
But before we get into the heavy theology, we really need to unpack our foundational term here, Furqan. It translates to the criterion. We're talking about the ultimate standard used to clearly distinguish right from wrong or truth from falsehood. Establishing this definition right off the bat is absolutely crucial because it highlights the text's primary goal, providing a definitive, uncompromising standard for humanity to measure reality against.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Context of the criterion. 2. The core conflict. 3. Absurdity of false deities. 4. A human messenger. And 5. The ultimate judgment. Let's start with Section 1. Context of the criterion, grounding the revelation in history.
Okay, so jumping into the history, the source text places this revelation right in the middle Meccan period. We're talking roughly the 3rd to 6th year of prophethood. And Maududi's commentary makes it really clear that this was a time of intense ideological struggle. The early Muslims were facing just immense pressure, which made the revelation of a clear, guiding criterion an incredibly timely and necessary anchor in what was a completely chaotic environment.
To set the stage, the text immediately hits us with this unbelievably dense, powerful concept, tabarek. This roughly translates to being supremely exalted, blessed, and just overflowing with permanent goodness. The commentary heavily emphasizes this specific word choice. It asserts the majestic, sovereign, and flawless nature of the divine right at the very beginning. It's firmly establishing ultimate authority before even addressing a single earthly dispute.
Moving right along to Section 2, the core conflict, focusing on the ideological resistance to prophethood.
Now, the opponents at the time, they were desperately trying to undermine the message from literally every possible angle. They called it a fabricated forgery, they dismissed it as ancient myths, and they even went so far as to accuse the prophet personally of being bewitched. But fundamentally, they aggressively rejected the messenger's human nature. And that specific friction point becomes absolutely central to this whole ideological battle.
The commentary points out an almost absurd claim from that era, that the prophet was secretly being tutored morning and evening by hidden historical figures. Maududi systematically and very neutrally dismantles this. He points out the glaring logical gap of attributing this profound, revolutionary theology to, whispered rumors from invisible tutors. It just doesn't hold up. Now, before we shift into the heavier theology of the text, it gives us this natively profound mental palate cleanser. It asks a simple question: why associate powerless partners with a sovereign creator? It invites the reader to just pause, step back from all the heated arguments of the time, and really evaluate the foundational logic of their own worldview.
Which perfectly transitions us into Section 3, absurdity of false deities and the logical argument against idolatry.
Maududi really hones in on the absolute irrationality of worshiping entities that lack the power to even control their own existence. Think about it. These false deities can't create anything. They don't hold the keys to life, death, or resurrection. So the core question is, how can you submit to something that is exactly as dependent and powerless as you are?
The text neutrally lays out a very stark theological reality here. Ultimate authority belongs exclusively to the Creator. By methodically exposing just how helpless these false gods are, it strips away the false idols using the criterion of logical truth. It leaves literally zero intellectual room for anything other than absolute divine sovereignty.
Let's dive into Section 4, a human messenger, expectations versus reality.
There is a massive contrast here between the grand, supernatural expectations of the disbelievers and the grounded reality of the text. The opponents wanted a total spectacle, right? Angels descending, hidden treasures, superhuman traits, completely devoid of normal human needs. But the Quranic reality presents a relatable human who eats food and walks in the markets specifically to serve as a practical, achievable model.
Maududi explains the functional necessity of this. For someone to be a practical, moral model for humanity, they logically must be human. The messenger has to experience the exact same daily struggles, the physiological needs, and the social environments as the people he's meant to guide. Without that shared human experience, his example would be totally impossible for ordinary humans to follow.
They actually asked, "What kind of messenger is this, who eats food and walks in the markets?" They were genuinely offended by his normalness. They couldn't reconcile that this supreme, divine truth was being delivered by a man buying produce in the local market. But as the commentary highlights, this exact relatability is what makes the message so potent. The practicality of the messenger was the entire point.
Let's move to our final section, Section 5, the ultimate judgment and the consequences of ignoring the criterion.
The commentary outlines the stark, uncompromising realities of the Day of Judgment. It focuses heavily on the deep, intensely personal regret of those who chose to follow false leaders instead of the truth. It outlines the horrifying realization of being deceived, the devastating loss of the undeniable truth, and above all, the overarching ultimate triumph of divine justice over temporary earthly power.
The source material vividly describes the psychological weight of this final judgment, using the striking imagery of a wrongdoer literally biting his own hands in absolute regret. Maududi emphasizes that there's no collective hiding here. Every single individual is held inescapably accountable for the standard they chose to follow during their life.
Oh, woe to me. I wish I had not taken that one as a friend. This powerful summary verse captures the ultimate despair of people who compromise their morality because of social pressure and false alliances. It's this tragic realization that the crowd they followed, the friends they trusted over the criterion, ultimately led to their ruin. It really highlights the eternal cost of peer pressure against truth.
So to wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. If such a clear, definitive standard exists to distinguish truth from falsehood, what standard are you currently using to measure your own reality? How will you evaluate your own choices, alliances, and beliefs tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep seeking clarity, and I'll catch you next time.